Hey guys, I'm going to help you out with lesson 13's homework, and here it looks like we're going to be adding some decimal versions and fraction versions of these decimals. And so on the first one it says that we need to convert tenths to hundredths to make it easier to add. So on part A we have 5 and 2 tenths plus 7 hundredths. Well, the 2 tenths is the same thing as 20 hundredths, so I change it to 5 and 20 hundredths plus 7 hundredths. And 20 hundredths plus 7 hundredths will give you 27 hundredths. So get 5 and 27 hundredths. Then it asks you to rewrite it as a decimal form down here. And so what you'd get in decimal form is 5.27. Okay, same thing on part B. They kind of already started it for us. The 5 plus the 3 would give you the 8 here. And they changed the 2 tenths to 20 hundredths. And when you add, you get 8 and 27 hundredths. When you change that to decimal form, you'd have 5.2 for the 5 and 2 tenths plus 3.07. And you add them together, you get 8.27. Okay, on part C we have 6 and 5 tenths plus 1 hundredth. So that 6 and 5 tenths is the same thing as 6 and 50 hundredths plus the 1 hundredth, which would give you 6 and 51 hundredths. So in decimal form, that would be 6.5 plus 1 hundredth, which would be 0.01, which would give you 6.51. Okay, on part D, we're going to do the same thing again. So 6 and 5 tenths would be 6 and 50 hundredths plus 7 and 1 hundredth. Now when we add these whole numbers, we're going to get 13. So I'm going to get 13 wholes and 51 hundredths. So in decimal form, this would be 6.5 plus 7.01 to give you 13.51. Okay, let's look at number 2. We have 4 and 9 tenths plus 5 and 10 hundredths. So I'm going to rewrite that as 4 and 90 tenths plus 5 and 10 hundredths. And when I add the whole numbers, 5 and 4 give you 9. And I add 90 hundredths and 10 hundredths, I actually get 100 hundredths, which is another whole. So instead of 9 and 100 hundredths, I would just rewrite that as 10. So in decimal form, this would be 4.9 plus 5.10 for the 10 hundredths, which would result in 10. Alright, on part B, we have 8 and 7 tenths plus 2 and 65 hundredths, which would be the same as 8 and 70 hundredths plus 2 and 65 hundredths. When I add those together, 8 plus 2 would give me 10, but the 70 plus the 65 is going to give you something different. We think we get 135. So that's hundredths, which is going to be greater than 1. So when I change that, if I take out 100 hundredths for another whole, I'd actually get 11 and 35 hundredths left. And if I did this in decimal form, it would be 8.7 plus 2.65, which would give me 11.35 in the end. Alright, part C, we have 7 and 3 tenths plus 6 and 87 hundredths. Well, 7 and 3 tenths is the same as 7 and 30 hundredths plus that 6 and 87 hundredths. When I add 7 plus 6, I get 13. But when I add the 30 hundredths plus the 87 hundredths, I'm going to get something a lot bigger. But let's do 7 plus 6 gives you 13. 87 hundredths plus 30 hundredths will give you, I believe, 117 hundredths. Or you could add it over here to check. So 117 hundredths. Well, that fraction is greater than 1, so I'm going to pull out 100 hundredths for another whole. and get 14, and then added 17 hundredths left over. So as decimal form, this would be 7.3 plus 6.87, which would give you 14.17 for the 17 hundredths. Okay, part D is 5 and 48 hundredths plus 7 and 8 tenths. So I'm going to rewrite that as 5 and 48 hundredths plus 7 and 80 hundredths. When I add that 5 and that 7, I'm going to get 12. If my pen will start working, 12. And then the 48 and the 80 would actually give you 128 hundredths, which is greater than 1. So if I took out 100 hundredths to get you another whole, I'd have 13 and 28 hundredths left over. So as decimals, this would be 5.48 plus 7.8 would give you 13.28. Alright, let's move on to the next question. And here again, we're going to be doing the same thing, just a few more examples. So let's start off with A. 2.1 plus 0.87 is in fraction form would be like 2 and 1/10 plus 87 hundredths, or we could change that 2 and 1/10 to 2 and 10 hundredths to make it easier to add. So I'm going to do that. So that's 2 and 10 hundredths plus 87 hundredths. When I add those together, I'm going to end up with 2 and 97 hundredths. So in decimal form, this would be 2.1 plus 0.87 equals 2.97. Okay, on part B, we have 7.2 plus 2.67. So if I wrote those as fractions, 7.2 would be like 7 and 20 hundredths, or 2/10, but I'm going ahead and skipping that step and putting it in hundredths. Plus that 2 and 67 hundredths. And when I add the whole numbers together, I'll get 2 plus 7 is 9. And then the 20 hundredths plus 67 hundredths would give me 87 hundredths. Now in decimal form, that would be 7.2 plus 2.67 equals 9.87. Alright, on part C, we have 7.3 plus 1.8, which would be like 7 and, we don't even have to mess with the hundredths here because nothing goes to the hundredths place, so I'm going to say 7 and 3/10 plus 1 and 8/10, and 7 plus 1 is going to give me 8, and 3/10 plus 8/10 is going to be 11/10. Well, that's greater than 1, so if I rewrote that and took out 10/10 to make another whole, I get 9 and 1/10. As a decimal, it would be 7.3 plus 1.8, should give me 9.1. Alright, part D, we have 7.3 plus 1.86. If I wrote those as fractions, it would be 7 and 30 hundredths. So I'm going to go ahead and do hundredths because the second one has hundredths. Plus 1 and 86 hundredths. I'm going to add those together. 7 and 1 gives you 8. And then 30 hundredths and 86 hundredths would actually give you 116 hundredths. And that's clearly bigger than 1. So we're going to take 100 of those hundredths out and change it to 9 and be left with 9 and 16 hundredths. As decimals, this would be 7.3 plus 1.86 equals 9.16. There we go. Alright. On part E, we have 6.07 plus 3.93. And if we wrote that as fractions, we'd have 6 and 7 hundredths plus 3 and 93 hundredths. So I'd write, hold on, my pencil's not working. Okay, so we have 6 and 7 hundredths plus 3 and 93 hundredths. Well, 6 plus 3 would give you 9. And then 7 hundredths plus 93 hundredths is 100 hundredths. Well, 100 hundredths is the same as a whole, so altogether that would be 10 wholes. And as decimals, I'd say 6.07 plus 3.93 equals 10. Alright, let's look at F. We have 6.87 plus 3.9, so I'm going to put those in hundredths, so 6 and 87 hundredths plus 3 and 90 hundredths, because that's the same thing as 9 tenths. Now when I add these, the 6 plus the 3 is going to give me 9. And the 87 plus the 90, if I add those over here, 87 and 90, give you 177. So 9 and 177 hundredths. Well, if I take out 100 hundredths to get to the next whole, I'd have 10 and 77 hundredths. Or if I did it in decimal version, it'd be 6.87 plus 3.9 equals 10.77. Okay, let's look at G. We have 8.6 plus 4.67, so I'm going to do them both in hundredths since the second one goes to the hundredths. So I'm going to say 8 and 60 hundredths plus 4 and 67 hundredths. When I add that 8 and 4, I'm going to get 12. And then when I add the 60 and 67 hundredths, I'm going to get 127 hundredths, which is going to be more than a whole, so I'm going to be able to take out 100 of those hundredths to get a new whole, so it'd be 13, and what would be left would be 27 hundredths. So as a decimal, I could say 8.6 plus 4.67 would give you 13.27. .27. Sorry, my pencil's having problems today. Okay, very last one. 18.62 plus 14.7 would be 18 and 62 hundredths plus 14 and 70 hundredths if we're doing it in hundredths. Well, 18 plus 14 is going to give you 32. And then 62 hundredths plus 70 hundredths is going to give you, I believe, let me check down here, 132 hundredths. So if I take out 100 hundredths to get to the next whole, I'd have 33 and 32 hundredths. So in decimal form, it'd be 18.62 plus 14.7 equals 33.32. Alright, if you have questions, let me know.